Hi, my name is Brad McKerihan. I am the Senior Training and Development Manager here at InsideTrack, and we have a special guest today to talk us through a healing-centered approach to students. Welcome, Anna Kern, everyone. Hello, Anna Kern.
Hi, Brad McKerihan. I'm excited to be here.
Now, a healing-centered approach, we used to call this a trauma-formed approach. Why the name change?
Yeah, so really we're taking the spotlight out of the individual and putting the onus back on the community. So how can we really address all the traumas and view them from a community lens instead of an individual responsibility lens?
Right. The person isn't their trauma, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I like that community lens. That's great. So, okay, tell us a bit about trauma, though. What is trauma? What constitutes as trauma?
Yeah, the best definition I've found is any experience in which a person's internal resources are not adequate to cope with external stressors. And those stressors may be very different, right, depending on that individual and how they cope with the trauma or stressors. So some examples can be anything from a global pandemic, right, COVID, a car crash, rape, bullying, you name it, extreme weather conditions, homelessness. So it really can vary based on what those stressors are.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's even like some smaller things that can cause trauma, right? I've worked with students in the past who might have had a really rough time in school. So when they come back to school, it's traumatic for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I like the healing-centered approach. It takes away that individual's responsibility. And the idea here is how can we address and support the full community behind it.
Anna, you were showing me earlier about how like the brain works with your hand. Can you show that to everyone?
Yes, and I will not take credit for this. This is Dr. Dan Siegel's approach, and I think it's such a great way to simplify how trauma shows up in the brain. So if you bring your hand up like this, sort of Scout's honor, right? And then you can bring in your thumb in the center, wrap your fingers around it. So we have this fist, right? And you can imagine this as your brain. What Dr. Dan Siegel says is if you open up your clenched fist here, this is the amygdala. So any guess, do you remember, Brad, what the amygdala?
Yeah, the amygdala is your lizard brain, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So that reptilian brain, this is really the flight, fight, or freeze response, right? This is the detect danger, right? This is one of the first parts of our brain that's developed. You can think of this as sort of your brain stem too, right? Okay. But then if you wrap your fingers around, our fingernail bed would be our prefrontal cortex. You remember what happens in that part of our brain?
I do not remember the prefrontal cortex.
Fair enough. Bio 101 was a long time ago.
Right.
So this is really executive decision-making, social emotional regulation. So if we're thinking about supporting our students, we want them to be here, right, in this prefrontal cortex part of their brain. What Dr. Dan Siegel says, though, is when you've experienced trauma or are processing potentially unprocessed trauma, he calls it flipping your lid.
Oh.
Right? So you can, the visual here is that we can no longer access the prefrontal cortex. All of our juices are getting sent here, right, to that flight, fight, or freeze part of our brain.
To the amygdala.
Exactly.
Oh, so that makes us run away. It makes us fight. It makes us lash out. That kind of response.
Exactly. So you can sort of picture this as folks wanting to, if you are see an upset student, maybe they start to clench their fists, right? Or their feet start tapping in class or in your office. And it's not a choice, right? Often they come off as these behaviors, but really this is the body taking care of itself, right? It's getting into that survival brain, which is great if you're in a forest with a bear, but not great if you're in a classroom, right? Or trying to interact with an advising appointment or working one-on-one with a student.
So you talked about the tapping of toes, the like clenching of hands. What else does this look like? If we were to tell folks, here's how you can spot this physically in a student, what would that look like?
Yeah, so the interesting part of the brain is that amygdala is also right next to the hippocampus, which stores our memories.
Right.
So I'm sure if you can think about a time when you're maybe really stressed out, you possibly forgot maybe a phone call, right? Or you forgot an email that you just sent, right? And that's because the amygdala actually can overwork itself and then start to shrink our hippocampus. So then we can see this showing up in difficulty focusing, right? Retaining information, recalling information. Also, we know in the classroom, ambiguity is such a big part of learning, right? We really require that as in our students. But when we're in this part of our brain, we're always searching for danger, right? Because that's how our brain is wired. That's good when we're faced with a bear, not so great when we're trying to learn something. So what happens is you have a lot of fear of taking risks, right? You have anxiety about public speaking. Everything just feels more exacerbated because of that. It can also show up as withdrawal and isolation as well.
Okay, so let me just see if I got this right. So because of that amygdala, if we're in that lizard brain, we can only really function like black or white. And learning, I think is what you're saying, is pretty gray sometimes. There's a lot of ambivalence, right? There's different sides to look at, so that we're not able to learn because we can't see the gray. Is that true?
Exactly. It's a lot harder to get to this part of our brain, right, where we really do well with learning.
The prefrontal cortex.
You got it, right? When we're operating in this part, right? Because we're constantly seeking danger. And once you've experienced one traumatic episode, you're more likely actually to perceive danger, even if it's not real.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what do we do? That really comes down to what do we do with students who are experiencing trauma, whether it's some very serious things that have happened to them, whether it's been on the smaller scale, it's still trauma. What can we do as we work with students?
Yeah, so there's a simple 4-pronged approach that we like to take, and it rhymes, so it's easy to remember, which we love, right? And you all might already be doing some of these things, which is great. The goal here with the healing-centered or trauma-informed approach is how can we do these even more intentionally and consistently? And the 4 approaches that we're looking for here is protect, connect, respect, and redirect. So those are the 4 things that we as student support staff can do to take that healing-centered lens.
Let's walk through each of those then. The protect, the connect, the respect, and the redirect. What does it look like to protect a student?
Right. So this is all about promoting safety, trustworthiness, transparency with our students, right? Because if we know that they're here in this sort of flight or fight mode, we want to make sure they feel really safe. You can almost think about that as like mama elephants, right, around the pond, right? That baby elephant can feel free to do anything they want because they have a herd of mama elephants nearby. So I just like that visual because I like elephants, and it's kind of silly to think about. But that idea here is how can we really promote safety in our interactions? And this can look a lot of different ways. One thing, again, if we know that students have a hard time with ambiguity when they're faced with trauma, how can we reduce ambiguity? That's one way to definitely support that protect method.
We could reduce ambiguity by really saying, this is who I am, right? This is my role with you. This is what our meeting time is going to look like. Here's what's happening and why I'm asking these questions. Very clear transparency. Those are some of the things that you had shared with me.
Yes, exactly. I love that language. Another thing that I think we often do without even realizing is we'll say something like, I need to see you after class, right? Or I need to book an appointment with you.
Scary.
Scary, right? And then immediately it sends that person to this like flight or fight zone. Like, oh, I'm in trouble, right? I'm fired, or I failed a class, or, oh, my mentor needs to see me. So that we call it a hotspot assessment, right? So how can we change that language from I need to see you to, hey, I need to see you in my office because I want to talk about the issue you had last week with your roommate, right? So being a little bit more clear can help, again, reduce that ambiguity.
That would definitely keep me at ease. I don't like when people just request meetings with me and I don't know what they're about. It's scary, right? It's like you're getting hauled into the principal's office.
Exactly. Yeah. Immediate sweat happening there, right? You don't want that. How can we avoid that? And any way that we can have structure in our interactions and try not to deviate it, so that the person that we're working with knows, like, okay, when I see Brad, I know what to expect. So I can immediately feel a little bit calmer and feel protected in that interaction, which will allow me to get here, right? In a place where I can learn and support decision-making.
That's great. I love all these strategies on how you might protect your students. It's really quite simple, right? Just let them know what to expect, so there's no surprises. You can make sure that they're in that prefrontal cortex. Walk us through how to connect with students. This might seem obvious, but there really are some good ideas about how to connect with students.
Yeah, and the reason why connecting is so important is because research shows the number one factor that can support trauma is resilience. And fortunately, we all have that, right? It's not something you either have or you don't. It's something we all have innately. And the number one factor that supports resilience is a strong relationship, right?
Wow.
So if you can have a caring and strong relationship, that's immediately going to help support getting that person out of that traumatic response zone. So that's why connecting is so vital, right? It goes back to the mama elephants as well.
It does.
So this can be as simple as remembering your student's name, maybe their pet's name, their best friend's name, their parent's name, any stories, right? So maybe you follow up on specific questions that have come up from the last interaction that you had. Eye contact also, right, can be simple, but really appropriate if you're doing Zoom or face-to-face. The one thing that I thought was really fascinating with eye contact is that often folks that experience lots of trauma, they have a hard time maintaining eye contact because they're always, again, seeking out danger, right? So it's uncomfortable to keep that prolonged eye contact. So one tip that I heard actually is that how can we make a space that the other person has a visual escape? So maybe in the room, you put the chair at an angle so that they can look elsewhere, still maintain, still have an option to look at you, but they have that visual escape component. That's like allowing them to turn their video off if they need to, right?
That's really interesting. Like put your desk at an angle. Could they look at a handout or something while you're talking?
Exactly. And I've talked to other student support staff or faculty who will have like gadgets, right? Fidgets, spinners, or whatever those are called.
Yeah.
And that can just help them focus on something else without feeling that pressure of like immediate eye contact, which sometimes can be hard for folks who've experienced trauma.
What else? How else can we connect with students?
You want to be super mindful of tone, right? Trying to keep a really neutral, open tone. Sometimes that's harder some days than others. Active listening is great, mirroring body language, repeating back the same language that they use. All of those things can be super helpful. And one of my favorites is humor. Laughter. Laughter actually, fun fact, reduces the traumatic response in the brain.
See, walk me through that. I don't really understand that. So does that work with your hand?
My understanding is that if you are in a space where you can like audibly laugh or chuckle, or even just haha, like a subtle laugh, right? That actually sends a signal to the brain that you're safe, right? Because if you're faced with a bear, you're probably not going to be able to laugh, right? So any way that it's almost sort of like tricking the brain. And that's how I understand it, at least.
Wow. So laughter creates a release of some sort where you're like, I've tricked my brain into knowing that I'm relaxed.
Yeah, exactly. And those are the main ones. So the next one, I know we talked about protect, right? Connect. The next one is all about respect. And this one is really key on choice and collaboration. Yeah.
What does choice and collaboration look like with a student?
Yeah. So a lot of this in my mind goes back to adult learning theory, right? Yeah. How can we really engage the other person by leaning on their expertise, right? understanding that they have their own lived experience and are coming to our conversations with a lot of experiences that we want to learn from too, right? So any ways where we can create opportunities for students to share knowledge, to share feedback, to make choices, and even lead when appropriate, will give them a space of almost ownership, right? And then support that respect method. The other ones that I think can be helpful is also just being super mindful of how folks engage, right? Whether that's an introvert or an extrovert, and allowing a space to be accessible for all different types of people.
Anna, when we respect a student, we need to take into mind how that person might engage with you as well, right? You've got your introverts, you've got your extroverts. Any hints on how to deal with different types of students as they come through?
Yeah, I think really the idea here is just being mindful of who's in front of you and creating a space that's welcoming, right? So open-ended questions are really great for that, right? If you have your yes or no closed-ended questions, it's a lot harder to encourage conversation. That's a great option for really opening up the room to someone for them to share as well.
I know another way to help respect a student is really to show some cultural competence, so you know a bit about their culture, but also to show cultural humility. So when you don't know something, ask about it, be curious about who that person is and the traditions or practices or family things that they do. I think that's good advice in respecting a student.
Absolutely. I love that, Brad. That mindful curiosity is so key to allowing the other person to feel respected and heard in that interaction.
Walk us through our last one. We've protected, connected, we've respected. How do we redirect our student?
Yeah, so this one's all about encouraging skill building, empowerment, competence. One tip I heard in this one actually from one of my trainees who was well versed in trauma-informed approaches was visualization. So there's some simple tasks that you can do that can get folks, again, out of this amygdala and into the prefrontal cortex. And one of those is having just a simple visualization exercise. So I had a previous advisor share that she would start all of her advising appointments just having that student visualize their favorite place to visit. And it sort of helped ground that meeting, right? And I loved that example of how to get into that place where they can get a little bit more into learning mode too.
Wow, that's so interesting. So you're redirecting by having them kind of get out of their own heads, imagining something visual.
Yeah, exactly. And another one with this can be sort of the power of yet, right? Mm-hmm. Which is all about Carol Dweck's growth mindset. So if someone is talking a lot about, oh, I'm not a math person or I'm terrible at this, right? How can we redirect by saying, have you ever thought about you're not a math person yet, right? And sort of opening up a new perspective for them to view themselves in a different way can help, again, take that healing-centered approach as well.
You talked a lot about resilience and how we build resilience through having a supportive, caring person, perhaps you who are watching this. How does that help when we redirect someone?
Yeah, any way that we can have a network or even just one person on that person's team to support them, to show up for them consistently, allows the student a space to continue to build and foster that resilience. So another way that can look is also for us to pause and celebrate any resilience that we see in that student, right?
Yeah, if there's a success, a win, we can celebrate that resilience.
Yeah, so and that's really all about just taking that strength-based approach, right? How can we highlight those wins, comment when we see a student being really resourceful, and that, again, that sort of positive affirmation can help that continued behavior happen time and time again. So the last thing I wanted to say about redirect, Brad, is there's a reason why mindfulness, meditation, yoga works, right? Is we're really putting the attention back on our breath. And I know this can get a little woo-woo, right, for folks, but it's actually neurological. So I think that the brain science behind it can be helpful as we're thinking about how this can impact those that have experienced trauma. So there's something called the autonomic nervous system. You can almost think about this as the automatic nervous system. It controls all the things that we don't even think about. Digestion, pupil dilation, right? Heart rate. It also controls our breath. So one of the things out of all of our autonomic nervous system elements that we do have control over is our breath. So if we can take a deep inhale and exhale, what we're doing is actually signaling to the brain that we're in a safe space, right? Because again, we're not going to be able to take those deep inhales and exhales if we're in an actual life-threatening spot.
When the bear is chasing you, you don't pause for a breath.
Exactly. Yeah, you are adrenaline's pumping, you're running away from the bear, or you're ready to fight the bear, right?
Right.
So this is, again, it's sort of like tricking the mind here that, okay, I'm in a calm space and I'm showing that in my body by taking a deep inhale and a long exhale. So I've worked with folks that have, will start off interactions with their students by just taking a deep inhale and exhale together. If that feels like my students aren't going to go for that, maybe it's just something you practice on your own. If you have like a student that really is hard for you, is a challenging student for you, I'll sometimes just practice my own breath work before that just to calm my own nervous system down as well.
Just one deep breath can really calm everything down. And there's science behind that.
Absolutely. Yep.
Anna, thank you so much. I know that you nerd out about the brain science behind this because it's fascinating, right? You've got your little hand to show us. So thank you for showing us. And just to remind all of you who are watching, there's the 4 steps. How do we protect our students? How do we connect with our students? How do we respect them? And how do we redirect as well? Protect, connect, respect, and redirect. They're really simple words. Thanks, Anna, for coming up with those.
Thanks, Brad. I appreciate it.
We encourage you to think of which one of those do you want to start first? Which one do you want to be intentional about and consistent about? What can you do now to take this healing-centered approach with your students? Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks.